It's so funny. Okay, so you guys are going to be watching this and we're pretending like, we're in this mood. But me and Dr. Shan have known each other for like 25 years. We were each other's you were my first friend at college. You were you and Mick were the first people I met. And we've stayed friends ever since.
Yeah, and we've been through a lot of stuff together.
We sure have.
It is hard to also just kind of keep on track and not be like, oh my gosh, how are you? So
yeah, but we're going to do it for you guys. We're here, Movie Club.
Mm-hmm. We're here for AV Club.
Mm-hmm.
And for today's AV Club, we are going to be talking about all of the Oscar movies, the politics of all of the Oscar films.
Good, because I've watched none of them, as you know.
Perfect. That's kind of the point. So the thing about the Oscar films this year is that not a single one is under 2 hours.
Ooh.
It would take you 26 and a half consecutive hours to watch all of the Oscar films. And there are a few that I don't think you need to watch.
Yeah, and they
opinion.
Well, they say that our attention spans are dead, and yet you're telling me all the Oscar movies are over 2 hours. Have we returned to long form? Is this where people are at? They're like, I just need to put something on that I can count on being stable for the next 2 hours because nothing is stable for 2 hours.
There's always a sort of rise of the fantasy genre and intense escapism and moments of political turmoil. Of course, a lot of these films have been made over the last 2 or 3 years. So it's interesting. They feel a little almost psychic, even though they've been in production for a long time. I imagine that a lot of people watching this haven't seen many of the Oscar films, both because who has the time right now?
Or the $23 for the ticket. I mean, movies are expensive these days. You got to really invest in that.
Yeah, and the vast majority of these are still out in the theater. You can't really stream them at home. There are a few, and I'll indicate those. But most of them, you have to go to a physical theater, probably not even your, mega chain theater. You have to kind of seek them out. Some of them are worth it, especially when they come out on streaming. Not all of them. Even if we can't see all of the Oscar films, I think it's still really good to know about what's going on in these Oscar films, because they are sort of supposed to be the height of our cultural, movie-going experience right now. And cultural theorists have always kind of looked at major cinema, sort of mass media, as absorptive, like a sponge for social anxieties, right? And so especially movies that are going to be nominated, right? The people who know movies are saying, okay, there's something really important about this, either artistically or in terms of the cultural zeitgeist. Something is resonating about this movie in the current movement. So that's why I'm thinking of this as kind of a 2025 culture time capsule.
Okay.
And so I want to tell you about some of the things these movies have in common. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go my favorite in terms of what I think is going to be most sustaining and important for you and the Dust Bunnies. I'm going first to last because I'm going to get heated about my last pick.
Good.
I'm going to give myself some time to kind of cook on that. So the Best Picture nominees this year warn us about fascism, racism and violence, and oligarchy, while reminding us about the power of art and interpersonal connection. So there's some really timely things in there, but it's not all doom and gloom. There's some really beautiful sort of nuggets that we can take out of these movies.
Do any of them teach us about what you do when the president of the United States makes himself the chairman of the Kennedy Center and tries to take over the art?
They don't. Well,
okay, that's an opportunity then. That's an opportunity for our AV Club listeners who are filmmakers. Tell us what's going to happen. Write it now.
Absolutely. But we do have a lot of fascists trying to tamp down free speech and a bunch of other things. So all of the following films address fascism head on. Wicked. Wait, have you not seen Wicked? Are you telling me?
I've seen Wicked. Of course I've seen Wicked. And I streamed Wicked. It's the only one. The last 3 movies I've seen, just to set the tone for you, are in theaters, are Amsterdam, which was quite a while ago, Oppenheimer, Barbie, and Wicked. Those are the ones I've seen in the theaters lately.
I love that you grouped those two together. You were just like, this is one. It's canon. Great. Yes. Good. So I'm glad you've seen Wicked. Because I was going to be like, how do I give you time that you can go see Wicked? Because I know musical theater, right? The power of musical theater. I'm Still Here which I'll describe that in a minute. Dune and The Brutalist, all about fascism, right?
Oh, okay.
Directly. Oppression and Violence, Nickel Boys, and I would argue The Substance and Amelia Perez. And then Honora addresses oligarchy and wealth inequality in really interesting ways as well.
Okay. That one I've heard about because Jed, who is our researcher for the Substack, called me to be like, you have to try and watch Honora. And then I decided it was too scary, so I didn't. So yes, he flagged this one as well. I thought it was scary because isn't it it's about a sex worker or something, is it not?
It is. Yeah.
I wasn't in a place where I could deal with that at that moment. So I was like,
very fair.
No.
Very fair. There's also, this is a little spoilery, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. There are 2 of the 10 movies in this list that basically imply that genderqueer people are saints, like pretty much literally saints. But they do this thing where it's like they're so good, they're almost like not human, and then they're sainted. It's a problem, and it is very strange, and it is very Hollywood Oscar nom, where it's like you are way behind the time and think you're on the cutting edge simultaneously, right? Yeah. So that's just another, I think, interesting thing. Last thing is there is so much smoking in these movies.
Smoking's back, baby. Smoking is back.
It's astounding. Like, just the cigarette budget of A Complete Unknown by itself. I can't even imagine, like, oh, poor Timothy Chalamet's lungs. But even our characters are over it at this point, right? Even the characters are like, I don't even know. So chain smoking and vaping back in a big way in 2025. So I'm going to talk about briefly what's good, what's bad in this movie, what's the problem within the movie, what's the solution, and kind of what does that mean? Cool. And then I'll briefly talk about 3 other things. How artistic, like what is the artistic merit of this film?
Okay.
How draining is this film? That's important to know right now.
Yeah, we need to know that.
And then what's the sort of like piece of radical imagination or the thing that is sustaining about this film that you can kind of hold on to when you sit down to watch it?
Okay, so that sounds fun.
How I'm going to go through. So Wicked, I'm going to go through a little quickly because I've done a deep dive on this that I've already recorded that I'm excited to share with you. My sort of log line for this movie, right, is it's about a con man who rises to power on the back of scapegoats, which in this case, literally a goat is the sort of main avatar.
They really handed that to you. Yep.
I know, right? And it's also the thing that I love so much about Wicked is that it is not just about sort of this melodramatic us versus them. Like, of course, we're going to hold the bad people to account, right? But in order for, and this is a little spoilery, in that the wizard is maybe not the benevolent force that he says he is, right? But the whole movie is challenging you as the viewer to sort of get outside your bubble, right? Like Linda, like pop in that bubble, and really take a hard look at even the people you agree with to hold them to account, right? So for Elphaba, she thinks the wizard's basically a god throughout this movie, right? And so she is fully prepared to kind of, worship him as such, believe that he's going to solve all of her problems. And in order to really be moral, be ethical, she has to take the leap of abandoning everything she's known, right? And sort of one of the things that I think is kind of fun about this is like once she overturns that, like everything is up in the air, right? And so she might as well be too, right?
Defying gravity. There we go. Okay.
But really, there's something about the kind of like, nope, everything that I thought I knew
is not
no longer applies, right? So I might as well fly. Why not, right? Sure. And there are lyrics in Defying Gravity that now are escaping me, right? That are about like, it's easier to imagine that I can fly than that I can go back to the, like, can't go back to sleep type sort of lyrics, right? So yeah.
The wokeness of Wicked. I know. This was a subliminal one.
Which again, V, right, is from a 1995 book
Right.
and then an early 2000s musical. So a lot of these things that feel so on the nose in this current moment, it's a little spooky that they feel on the nose because they were not made for us. They were made to try to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself.
Yeah, and when we think about 1995, that was a pretty good time. That wasn't the worst of times when it comes to the fascist stuff that's going on.
Nope.
No, it was all skippets and rollerblades and fun times back then.
Slap bracelets. Which are back.
All right, so there's Wicked.
So artistry, really quickly. One of the reasons I'm so happy that this is getting recognized for awards is because so much love was put into the practical sets, the things they built, the live singing, all of these things, right? Like, have you seen the videos of Cynthia Erivo flying in the harness while singing?
Yes.
Incredible, right?
Incredible. Also no Lin-Manuel Miranda or James Corden. So, we're defying gravity there too.
We're opening up the doors to
a lesson in overusing your popularity also here with these characters that are missing. And I don't know. Yeah. I'm making shit up to sound smart in front of you, Dr. Shan. I think that one worked though.
V, you're one of the smartest people I know, and you always have to Harvard's own V Spear, right?
Here we are.
All right. So drain factor, very little drain factor for this movie, right? Even though it's about a really heavy theme and it feels kind of pressing with, political resonances of the moment, it ends on a note, right? It actually ends on what's called the war cry, right? Which is that thing that Alphabet does at the end. Every Alphabet has a different war cry, which is really fun. But it leaves on this kind of like energetic, hopeful note, right? Going into part two. And we've kind of talked about the radical imagination, right? But like this idea that you have to sort of like, your morals are your morals. It doesn't matter who's doing the thing. You have to hold everybody to account. But this movie also believes that people can change, right? Glinda and Firo, or Galinda, they start off as like really protected by their privilege. But they do, like, this narrative believes they can change, right? And for good, right? And it delivers that message in a really joyous and empowering way, I think.
Yeah.
So that's Wicked. That's why it's at my top. As much as I'd love to see it win an Oscar, I don't actually think it needs to, because I think it has had such a moment, enough people will see it. And it's the two next films that I hope win, but I don't think will, because I think they're worth seeing, even though you kind of have to seek them out. My second pick here is Nickel Boys, which
I've not even heard of this.
It flew under the radar, but it's incredible. It tells the story of two young Black men, Elwood and Turner, who meet in a segregated juvenile facility framed as a reform school for boys named Nickel Academy. It's a fictional story, but Nickel Academy is based on the Dozier School for Boys, which operated in Florida from 1900 to 2011, in which they, in the last decade or so, have just been digging up mass graves of boys who were...
seem good.
No, it's no.
Very bad.
Reform school for boys in Florida in the mid 1900s does not sound. There's nothing about that says
reads like troubled teen industry in Utah in the early 2000s. Yeah, this just feels very, very icky and bad.
Exactly. However, watching the movie does not feel icky and bad because the movie does not fetishize suffering.
Oh, right? Okay, that's different.
It is different. And it's one of the things that I think is so beautiful about it. One of the things that really sets this movie apart, and one of the things that's incredible about the artistry, is it's shot all in first person perspective, pretty much. So you are looking through the eyes of two of the characters. At first, it's just one of them, and then it switches so you get both perspectives. But it's this kind of thing that could definitely feel like a gimmick, right? Like the movie opens up on one of the most gorgeous sequences I've ever seen, where it's like you are laying in the grass under a citrus tree and like watching the citrus tree kind of like, and it's almost like you can smell it. You can feel like this first person perspective really kind of immerses you in the film, right? That could be used sort of in traumatizing ways against the viewer, I think.
Sure.
But when very bad things happen to the characters, it tends to like fade to black. Like it doesn't turn away. It lets you know what's going on through the sounds and that sort of thing. But what it isn't doing is like aestheticizing or glamorizing the bad things that are happening by showing them to you. unlike the last film in this list, which again, I'm just chomping at the bit to tear apart.
Okay.
So
good. So interesting. So artistry, different, first person, telling a story that's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And good is having a strong sense of justice. Bad is complying with racists and sadists. The problem is a corrupt and racist justice structure. And the solution is resistance, connection, empathy, and standing up for yourself and others, right? The drain factor, like I've said, this is rough in a lot of ways, right? But though it's a real and horrific story, it never revels in that, right? It's actually really about the lives of these two young men and their connection and what happens afterwards. And so in terms of radical imagination, I think that this reminds us of the power of art and the power of empathy. One of the really interesting things about the first person perspective is a lot of times these boys are looking down, right? Because of the situations they're in. And it means that they're literally spending a lot of time contemplating other people's shoes.
Oh, how interesting.
Do you know what I mean? So like this idea of like empathy being about thinking about what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. You see a lot of people walking in different kinds of shoes in this movie, and it's subtle. I don't think you would come out of this movie feeling like that's a metaphor that hit me over the head, right? But it is really beautiful. I think it's really worth
the watch. I hadn't even heard of that one. That does sound very interesting, though, and also super poignant given what we're dealing with politically as it relates to like people saying, oh, we're going to build a bunch of new prisons, and like, why should we have child labor laws, and let's, lock people up as young as friggin' possible, and all this horribleness, detention centers, all that. So I think certainly we could use some empathy and POV around that for a lot of folks who haven't had to face that in the past. Yeah.
I didn't even think about that, V, but you're totally right with the conversations going on about El Salvadorian prisons and Guantanamo and increasing sort of the amount of prisoners that can be put in spaces. This movie really reminds us that people, it's like the Stanford prison experiment, right? When you give people power and you dehumanize the people they have power over, even if it's just an exercise, it's people do atrocious things, right? So there's a reason that we have prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment, and we have oversight, and it would be really awful to see those things be undermined.
Like, we already tried the horrible; it didn't work out.
Right.
Let's not do it again. Let's not forget that we tried the horrible.
Yeah. So many of these movies are meant to serve as reminders for those kinds of things.
All right. So next, number 3
is called I'm Still Here. This is a piece of foreign cinema from Brazil. It tells the story of Eunice Paiva and her family, who lived under an authoritarian regime in Brazil that existed from the 1960s to the 1980s. It was like a military dictatorship.
Okay.
So in this movie, the patriarch of the family is extrajudicially disappeared by the regime, and Eunice refuses to be silent. So we see the disappearance, we see the interactions with the justice system, and then we get a couple of major time jumps, which also tell us a little bit more about what Eunice Paiva did with the rest of her life. This movie is astounding. What's good in this movie, obviously, is fighting for truth and transparency. It's about the power of journalism. It's about the power of lawyers, right?
That's all we have right now. Yes, the courts.
I know. And it's about the problem is complying with the horrors of authoritarianism, right?
Okay.
And the problem is authoritarianism, and the solution is basically doing everything in your power to fight back, which this woman does, and continues to fight even after that military regime has fallen, right? Which is one of the reasons this movie is so moving. In terms of artistry, like, it's more beautiful than it needs to be, but the thing that everybody's talking about is Fernanda Torres's performance as the main character, as Eunice, which rocked my world. I mean, she's incredible. In this film, there are a lot of photos and videos that are touchstones for the characters. And during the credits, they show the actual photos and videos that they recreated for the film, and it was so lovingly and like perfectly done that it continued the 10-minute sobbing jag that had started for me beforehand.
It's a cry movie, though. You need it,
That's the thing. All right, so drain factor is next, and this is what I was going to say. This is like one of my top 5 most liquid coming from my eyes in a theater experience. Like it's up there with Up and with Life is Beautiful for me.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. But it was so cathartic, and I left feeling energized, not drained. So the movie's beautiful. It leaves you feeling grateful for the hard and life-threatening work people have done to push back on dictators. And I really did leave with this like renewed sense of urgency and purpose and appreciation rather than just like everything is terrible feeling.
Yeah. Good.
Because it's a reminder, right, in terms of radical imagination, that the human spirit is strong, that there's joy and meaning even when things are hard, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lovely moment after the dad goes missing where the rest of the family is posing for a photo for the newspapers. And the reporters are like, basically like, you should look a little more somber than you look right now. And they're like, we're not going to do that. No, we're going to smile. Take the picture. I don't know what your problem is. Right? Like, and so it's like defiance is about continuing to experience pockets of joy and pleasure and pursuing meaning, even when things are just like really dark and hard. That's the thing about Fernanda Torres' performance is she's able to hold all these little contradictions and contrasting emotions. And so I hope that she does win. Like my personal opinion is I hope that she does win Best Actress. It might also go to Demi Moore, who is great, but like this performance deserves to be lauded.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm excited to watch that one now. I'm like, okay, I'll watch that one. Because I can remember watching like Schindler's List in school or Life is Beautiful or any of these things and being like so fundamentally changed in terms of what my values would be going forward. And I didn't know like a lot of Jewish people growing up. I grew up in like a small town in Connecticut where everybody was like Catholic pretty much. So it was like this window into, oh, wow. Yeah, no, this is like something that happened that I can now understand, that I'm so sad for, but that I want to make sure never happens again. And again, find it like we try to do on Under the Desk, right? On a smaller scale, this idea that you have to make room for like good news. You have to remember that there are things to be hopeful for, even when stuff is super, super dark. So I'll definitely watch that one. That'll be interesting to see. Also, I need a good cry. I love to cry at movies because it's like, you know, theater opens up a space for you. It holds you in it, lets you have all your feelings, and then it puts you back together before it sends you into the world. And sometimes you need that like guided cry.
Stories activate more of your brain, right, than straight information. And there have been some great, like, actual scientific studies of air compositions in movie theaters where certain, like, respiration spikes when a character that you have a connection with is in danger of going through something hard. Even more than, like, your chase sequences or your battle scenes or that kind of thing, right? But movies give us this opportunity to really connect with characters and feel this like strong empathy and like really tap into sort of like bodily and emotional resonances that we don't always get when we're sort of like reading a story, right? I mean, reading like a factual story.
Right. Oh, that makes sense.
So it can be really good psychologically too.
Yes.
All right. Movie number 4. I just mentioned Demi Moore.
Oh, we're going to talk about Substance?
It's The Substance.
Okay. This has been hot. A lot of people on TikTok are talking about this. I still haven't seen this one. Yeah. But folks are like, you have to see it. You have to see it.
V, how do you feel about needles?
You know, I got a lot of tattoos.
Okay.
I feel okay. Great, I feel okay about it. It's very needle heavy.
So many needles, right? So if like that would be the one thing that if somebody had like a needle
trigger warning,
I would be like, not this movie, babe.
Trigger warning needles.
Yeah.
Okay. Because what's it about?
Yeah. So the movie is about basically Demi Moore is this like jazzercise star from the 80s that still has this kind of like, you know, work it out fitness show. But she's, you know, like she's getting a little older and she's still fire, obviously. Yeah. But the like old men who run the show basically like fire her so that they can get somebody hot and new. And in the course of this, without like giving too much of the plot away, she gets contacted by this mysterious agency that offers her the substance. And what happens with the substance is if you inject yourself, you get to kind of have like 2 lives, one as your normal body and one as like this like younger idealized version of yourself. but
Okay.
you have to keep going back and forth for it to work on a set schedule, right?
Okay.
And so, like, a lot of the theme of this movie is about respecting the balance. But obviously, it's like when she has this younger, hotter self, which is not hotter, Demi Moore. You couldn't get hotter than Demi Moore, but like in the logic
In
of
the way they are, yeah.
right. This like male gaze version of like literally like the old men who are running the show gaze version.
Got it.
The balance doesn't get respected, and some stuff happens. So that's the substance, right? So what's good, right, is like this is obviously like a warning tale. So like embracing yourself, even if you're worried that it'll upset other people. What I really love is there's a kind of like, did you ever hear any of the discourse about like the Babadook as like a gay icon or that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, there is an element of this at the end that is a kind of character that is getting that kind of treatment, right, as like a kind of like monstrous icon, which I'm absolutely loving. And so what's good really is like not sacrificing everything for impossible and gross societal expectations. The problem, I guess, is being a woman in today's society and internalizing misogyny, right? Like, and the solution, I think, is like not, right?
Yeah.
And not looking to others to determine your worth, right? But just like embracing your full self and not letting gross people have power over you.
You know what this kind of reminds me of?
What?
Death Becomes Her. You know, in Death Becomes Her, she takes that vial and then she gets to like live forever, but she doesn't take care of her body. So she ends up like deteriorating and it ends up being like a whole problem. I just saw the musical Death Becomes Her on Broadway. I have to say, if you're in New York, you got to see it. But if you're not, go back and watch the movie Death Becomes Her. This feels very Death Becomes Her, and I loved it then.
That's a great.
The 90s are back.
Seen it in such a long time. Yeah, because that also has like body horror. Elements, right? Like the twisted around neck kind of thing. In terms of artistry, the performances are great. The makeup is great. The director is a woman, and there is this is one of two movies I think that has a lot of like sexy gyrating. And I feel like you can tell the difference between this and Anora a little bit, right? Like the camera gets more up in Quali's business when she's filming her workout videos, but it's so objectifying that it's almost camp. Yeah. Right? Where you're like, whoa. Whereas with Anora, like it's not clear that we're critiquing this kind of like objectifying gaze all the time. So
got it.
Drain factor, really the thing is like body horror, right?
Yeah.
Again, needles. It's horror, but it also is like so over the top that there's something I think kind of campy, and it's meant to be embraced in that spirit.
Okay.
Yeah. And
all right, that's on the list too.
Yeah. Great. All right. Next, this is 5. Is Conclave. Have
never heard of it? Never heard of it. Okay. No. I think Conclave, I think of nuns, which I'm not even sure if that's what it is.
Oh, there are nuns. There sure are. But this is basically
nuns are so scary. Is this a horror movie? I don't feel like they ever have like nice nuns. Not since Sister Act have nuns been like the like hero of a movie. They're typically like put into like the most dangerous, spooky spots.
So Isabella Rossellini is nominated for playing a nun in this movie, and she has 7 minutes of screen time or something like that, because you want her to be scary, because this is like Real Housewives of the Vatican, where the Pope dies, they get like locked into, you know, the Vatican, and they go through the process of picking a new Pope, which is very secretive, right?
The Vatican freaks me out, man, especially being raised Catholic. I'm telling you, there ain't nothing spookier to me than the Vatican, you know?
Well, what is that? I was raised Catholic too, and because I take students to Italy almost every summer, I've been there 17 times now.
What does it smell like in the Vatican? Does it smell like incense and fear?
That's so interesting, V. I don't know. There is so much air in the Sistine Chapel. I mean, not in the Sistine Chapel, but in St. Peter's, the sort of like the Vatican. The floor to ceiling, it's over 300 feet.
Wow.
From the floor to the dome. The scale of it is unimaginable. So I think in order to have a kind of incensey smell, you need kind of like close quarters.
Okay.
And this could not be more like cavernous, dark, cold. It's all like marble and like not a lot of lights. And there are like I mean, okay, I could go on it. We'll talk about the Vatican.
Well, of the senses, though, the smell one is not the strongest because maybe the other senses are taking over with how like grand and spooky ooky it can be.
For me, it always feels kind of like cold in there, even in the heat of summer when I'm usually there, because all the surfaces are marble and everything is so cavernous and dark. It's really interesting. But I can say that they do an incredible job in this movie of replicating the Sistine Chapel. It looks almost exact because, of course, they were not allowed to film this movie in the Vatican. The Vatican, not a fan.
No.
The main character here is a cardinal who wants nothing to do with running the conclave, but has to anyway. His name is Thomas Lawrence, and he's doubting his faith. So here's another
doubting Thomas.
There you go, V. Right. That was one that it took me like 3/4 of the way through the movie to be like, I see what you did there, Conclave. There are a few other things like that I might make a little like spoilery video about that I'm not going to do here. But there's like lots of interesting metaphors and like little Easter eggs there. But it's like gossip, intrigue, etc. So, but the thing that's kind of, again, I will talk about this Easter egg. There are things that feel, again, like relevant to the election outcome, even though that this was filmed beforehand, right? So it's a fictional movie about an election for the Pope, wherein one candidate, who is the man in room 45, they keep showing.
Okay.
They keep showing his room number, actually gets disqualified for a sex scandal. Imagine. Another gets disqualified because he's corrupt and has committed financial crimes. This is spoilery. Yet another gets disqualified because he espouses racist and xenophobic politics and wants to make the church great again, right? So those are the things that are bad. Good is having a healthy amount of skepticism and an open mind, caring about others and your ethics rather than power and ego. Problem, I love a movie with a thesis statement speech. Do you know what I mean? Where the character gets up and they're like, this is our Independence Day or whatever.
Yeah.
That's like bonus because he also says the title of the film. But there are 2 thesis statement speeches in here. At the beginning of the movie, Dean Lawrence gives a homily in which he says that certainty is the great enemy of unity and that God's gift to the church is variety and diversity. So again, here's the film like giving us its ideology. And then in the third act, Cardinal Benitez says that having seen war, the enemy is not external, but internal, cautioning the other cardinals and us against our own hate and ambitions. And that view is sanctioned by the film. So this is a beautiful film. Again, like it's such a like kind of like catty kind of fun watch that it has these really beautiful moments that kind of go above and beyond what I think they need to. It's not very draining at all. Like there are resonances with the election, but it's not it's more fun than anything, though I object to the twist at the end. A lot of people do, but I'm not going to talk about it for giving it away. But it feels like they think they've really done something, and again, it's like, wow, this would have been interesting a long time ago, but like we're past
that now.
Right.
I feel that.
And yeah, I think that it can kind of sustain us, and I think that it's interesting, and I think its messages are good. So that's why it makes the top 5 for me.
Right? Well, I love that. I mean, look, you have given such a thorough explanation on these movies. I'm not sure that I do need to see them, but I will. I will see some of them, but at least I'll know the ones I don't want to see. And now we're starting to turn the corner on shading some of the Oscar picks. Tell me.
We are, but I will say the next 3 I actually still really liked.
Okay.
And then I've got a distinct bottom 2. So I still would recommend this next one, which is my 6th pick, which is Honora. So this is like Pretty Woman in the time of violent oligarchies, right? And I didn't know that I needed that, but it's still a pretty good film, I think, right? So in this, like, you've got a character who is being direct about what they want and being very clear when things are transactional, right? That's the main character whose full name is Honora. And that's contrasted against sort of like the bad ethics of this film, which is using people without being clear about what you're doing, right? Lying, manipulating, using power in all these crappy ways. And we get a couple of characters here that eventually are like undermining the oligarchy in interesting ways. So that's kind of like our solution to these problems that are being created by wealth inequality and power dynamics. The tone of this movie is a little strange. It really does start off in this kind of like Pretty Woman place. And it goes to a place that's more like, I don't want to say Reservoir Dogs. It's not that violent, but like it's much more about this kind of like underworld kind of mob place, right? The tone shift, I think, for some people in terms of drain factor here could be a little unnerving in a few different ways. There's like sort of discussion of sexual assault, but like almost played for laughs at times. And that I think is the one thing that I would really caution people about this movie with. Also, don't watch it with your parents. That's another thing I would tell you about this movie.
That is something we should tell people. Yeah, don't watch it with your parents or your kids. Yeah, for sure.
Nope. It starts off in New York, and it jet sets to a couple of different locations, Las Vegas being the other sort of like main location for the film. But yeah, it's about this sex worker who meets this twink Russian oligarch son, basically. And they start like an adorable relationship that becomes not so adorable. And I think this movie is really kind to the main character. There's a little bit where I'm like, are we sort of thinking critically about the male gaze and objectification? Or are we like, check this out? You know what I mean? When the camera's moving around. That's not a big deal to me either. Like, that doesn't bother me really. And this movie's worth seeing. It's really kind of about like, you know, the dangers of wealth inequality and the outsized power that people with money have over the, you know, people without power. So there's nothing that's like hugely disturbing or hugely like life transforming about this movie, but it's a good watch. I know we have friends who would disagree with me on this, who I like can hear them right now being like, how can you not say better things about this movie? But it's great. It's just not as wonderful for me as some of the ones that are in my top 5.
Yeah, and for folks who watched it, hit the comments. What were your thoughts about it? Let us know.
Yes, definitely. I fully expect you to disagree with me. I can't wait to have longer conversations about this. Yeah. I'm sure I missed things, right? This is all my personal perspective. So help me think outside my bubble, right?
And my personal perspective is a person who doesn't watch the movies. So here we are.
Great.
All right, what's next? Number 6
is a complete unknown. This is the first of the 2 Timothée Chalamet videos. The first of the 2 Timothée Chalamet vehicles that I'm going to be talking about, right? This is the one where he plays Bob Dylan. I choose to see this movie about the power of art, to move, to enrage. Technically, it's a biopic of Bob Dylan's rise to fame and his transition to his electric phase, right? But I think this movie is about some really good songs and about Pete Seeger, who everybody is going to want to be their like folk performer uncle after this movie. He's like the Mr. Rogers of the music scene. That's exactly the reaction, right? So like this movie is worth it for Pete Seeger. So good is like art that moves people and changes people. Bad is refusing to let people change or define, like people trying to change or define who other people are and what's good art, right? The problem is that Bob Dylan is a genius, but kind of an asshole, right?
That tracks.
I don't know that there's a good solution to that. Bob Dylan was involved in this movie, which I kind of think is so interesting. Like he was like, yeah, I'm pretty much an asshole, right? I think making this. But it really, I think the focus shifts to the music more than anything. So maybe the message is like, let art transcend the artist, something like that.
The message to me is take a boomer to the movies day. Have a little nostalgic moment. Let them relive their childhood.
So artistry, Chalamet's great. I like Chalamet, so your mileage may vary based on whether or not you like him. Newsflash, Bob Dylan wrote some great songs, which feel timely. Again, I've been listening to the times they are changing on repeat right now. But this looks and feels like a biopic. It's a good version of a movie biopic, right? So like, hooray, recommend, super fun, but not like you have to go run and see this movie. Right.
Will they make this movie into a musical, as they have been doing, making movies and jukebox musicals all over the place?
Ooh. Yeah, I bet
Yeah.
they will. Yeah. I feel like you heard it here first.
You heard it here. We're predicting a Broadway interpretation of this movie. All
I'm
right,
shocked they
go
haven't
see it
done a
now.
Dylan musical already, have they? We'll have to look into that. The great thing about this movie, very little drain. I like to mention doesthedogdie.com, which is like a content warning website for movies. It's really good if you have specific like content things you want to avoid.
Yeah.
I don't think they have one for the trigger of having dated like an asshole musician. But that would be
this will hurt you if you've done that.
That would be the one content warning for this film.
Doesthedogdie.com. That's so helpful. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to know that kind of stuff.
Totally. And this is the type of movie that if you took a shot every time somebody looked reverently at Bob Dylan like he was a genius, every time he was like, even right after he was an asshole to him, you would need to go to the hospital after this movie. Like, I did almost strain my eyeballs from like rolling them at certain points over these kinds of like, oh my God, this song is so good. Looks, but it's great. Right. Reminds us that art has power, and we love that.
We'll take it.
This is
now we're turning.
Yes, I liked Dune Part 2, which is what I'm going to talk about next.
Okay, Dune Part 2. All I know is they had a cool popcorn bucket. I know nothing about this movie.
Oh my gosh, that sandworm bucket. Yeah,
I know nothing else.
Yeah, controversial popcorn bucket.
Yeah.
If you don't know what we're talking about, Google it, but like not at work. And this is one of those movies, right, that is like to the max sci-fi world building. I'm not going to get into that in my recap. What I am going to do is distill this down to what its essence actually is, right? Which is this movie is part 2 of the story of Dune, which is an allegory about the dangerous intersection of colonialism, religion, and scarce natural resources, right? It is set on a desert planet that Frank Herbert, who wrote the story, is intended to be the Middle East, basically, right? And Dune 2 is the segment of the Dune story that focuses on the rise of Paul Atreides as a messiah-like figure who brings about a holy war, right?
Cool.
It's hard to do my normal like good bad problem solution on this because it's just like a slice of a larger allegory. But that being said, this film asks the audience to be really worried about the creation of messiah figures, and especially this intersection of power and religious faith and fervor, the granting of extreme power and unquestioning loyalty to individuals. This movie is about fascism, right? It's another anti-fascism story.
What does allegory mean?
Oh yeah, great, V. Thank you. So
it's a big word.
Yes, of course. So basically, this movie pretends to be talking about a fictional planet in a distant future, but it's all a metaphor for what's going on right now.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So it's trying to teach us something about the current moment by making up a fictional story that's like, oh, this isn't here. Mm-hmm. You don't have to like run this through your filter of identity or not wanting to be lectured at politically or that kind of thing. We can do a video at some point too about like cognitive estrangement in politics, but this idea that like you're thinking elsewhere, you're not thinking here. And so we're able to kind of make some like really bold political statements without it coming across as like, I'm lecturing you about politics.
Got it. Allegory, new vocabulary word for the dust bunnies and me. Here we go.
In this world of Dune, this planet, Arrakis, this desert planet is so important because it has this natural resource called spice, right? And spice, when you inhale it, gives you sort of like the preternatural ability to see things and focus on things. And it is what allows interplanetary navigation. So it's really important. But it is literally like this movie is like, don't get high on your own supply. That's
okay,
like
also don't get high on spice, okay? That shit they sell at the gas station. That's what I know spice to be. That is not good for you. That's what they're talking about. They're like, don't get gas station weed.
That's the main allegory. That's the main thrust of this movie. Great.
Perfect.
So that's Dune Part 2. It's gorgeous. It's fun, especially if you like sci-fi. It's great.
Great.
Okay. Now we are turning to 9 and 10. which are the problematic films. Amelia Perez.
Yeah,
Have
what
you
is
heard
the deal with
anything
this?
about this?
Just I heard them sing the song, and I know they won some other award, and everybody was mad. And it's about like a sex change musical is how I would describe what I know about it, but I have not seen it. Yeah, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. So yes, we've heard our Broadway's own Amy Hillner, friend Amy Hillner, doing her own rendition of the Penis to Vagina song, which I think is incredible. This movie is like, just reading the description of this movie feels like a fever dream, right? But this is about the sort of like head figure of a drug cartel in Mexico who is secretly trans, who hires a lawyer to get her like the transitional care she needs, and then kind of like what happens before and after. It's a big swing. And normally, I love a big swing, right? Like, I think that big swings can be really interesting. And there is some interesting stuff about this movie. I think Zoe Saldana gives a good performance. But the problem here is what's going on behind the camera. Okay. And what's going on behind the camera is this is a movie that was made by a cis white French guy about how terrible Mexico is, right? This is sort of like people from Mexico are like, excuse me, right? And about how basically like the implication of the movie is that trans women have like a violent masculine side and like a saintly, perfect, mothering woman side. And it is.
We don't need that.
Nope.
We don't need that. Not with Nancy Mace on the loose these days. We don't need that. Oh, no.
That's not how it works, right?
No.
And if we had talked like a month ago, I would have been like, okay, but the lead actress who plays Amelia Perez is really good. But recently, tweets have come out that are like horrifically, dehumanizingly anti-Muslim and racist and a few other things. Yeah. So
yeah, they're trying to like cut her out of the movie, but you can't, right?
Yeah. This movie won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy or Musical already, before a lot of the sort of stuff about the lead actress came out. But people are kind of calling this the like green book of this year's field, right? Where it's like, ooh, if you really pick this apart and talk to the people that it matters to, whose stories you're trying to tell, like this is not it. This is not it. So it's something to see. It's on Netflix. It's one of the only movies you can stream right now. But that's really the problem people have with it. And it will be very interesting to see how the Oscars handles the controversy around the film and the main actress, right? So we'll see. That's Amelia Perez, and here we are. The
category, it's comedy and or musical. That's how it goes
in Golden Globes.
Okay, I was going to say, because like there are some sad musicals that I wouldn't put up against a comedy movie, you know. But comedy or musical, huh? They got to work on that. I know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Especially like again, like Wicked. And things like Wicked and Cabaret are addressing some of the very same things that would be like dramatic, right? So, yeah, I agree. It's a very strange thing. I don't love it either. All right, we've reached my personal opinion, my absolute bottom of the barrel. Give me that nearly 4 hours of my life back.
4 hours.
The Brutalist.
Ooh. It was brutal, huh?
It was one of the most deeply unpleasant viewing experiences of my entire life.
Wow.
Because it is just like a misery porn tortured man film, right?
Ugh.
There's an important story in here, I'm sure. And please, I want to hear people's absolute takedown of this opinion, of my sort of like perspective on this. But what I don't want to hear, because I just don't care, is how beautiful the credits are or how they run diagonally. Which, I also teach like a basic art history class, right? Like, cool. I think that, you know, there's this film has artistic merit. Great. It doesn't justify the narrative or
4 hours. Goodness.
It's beautiful. The performances are good, but I just don't know why we're still telling this story, V.
What is it about even?
So it is about and this is important, fictional architect named Laszlo Toth. He's based on a couple of different actual brutalist architects. We kind of find out through the narrative of the story that he was in a concentration camp, was released or escaped, made it to the United States, and basically from there he develops a heroin addiction, gets kicked around, is really kind of a jerk to almost everybody in his life, but manages to make a few big concrete buildings.
For 4 hours? We have to do this for 4 hours?
Yes.
And the buildings aren't even pretty at the end. Not to side with Donald Trump on literally anything, but Trump has been one of the most outspoken critics of brutalist architecture and wants to like tear down the FBI building because it's brutalist and like put up like a new
Yeah. And I don't even know that this movie is saying some of the ideas behind, okay, this movie ends. I'm not really spoiling everything. And if you want to sit through,
no one is going to see it.
This is not like, no, so many people are. So many people disagree with me on this. And I love that. Okay. That's one of the best things about talking about movies, right? It's like we see different things, right? But the end goes to the Venetian Biennale, the Architecture Biennale, which happens every 2 years, which like kind of honors the biggest trends in art and architecture and lauds people who have done good work. So the idea is now we're seeing sort of like the body of Laszlo Toth's work as an architect that he did after, escaping to the United States. But the movie even seems to be mocking the idea that like it was worth it. Which that's the thing for me. I just don't do cynicism and nihilism, right? Some people that's going to resonate with. For me, I'm just like, look, I know things can be bad. Can we talk about how to we have like one wild and precious life, right? And how do we sort of sustain ourselves even when bad things are happening? So yeah,
let me make sure I'm understanding it correct. So the movie then, after 4 God blessed hours,
3 hours and 35 minutes is actually how long it is. With an intermission.
Okay. But after all of this time and watching this video, they try to say to you that escaping a concentration camp wasn't worth it because you made ugly buildings?
No, not quite.
Okay, because that's what I heard.
No,
okay.
Not quite. But like, if bad things happen, it's almost like not recoverable from, and nothing you do is necessarily going to be worth it, right? Because
you'll still have the bad thing on you in some way.
Because like life is pain or whatever is what I took from this movie. Again, somebody please save me from this interpretation of this film.
I don't know that they will, because I think that we see this in the discourse on social media, right? This idea that like suffering is virtuous, right? That you and I have talked about before too, and that how it's infiltrating like leftist spaces, this idea of suffering is virtuous, which is kind of like, what the Christian nationalists think, and now some of the left-wingers are acting out upon, and maybe that's what this is about. Like,
one of the next AV clubs that I think we should do is about political melodrama, because it is like, that's it, right? We've had lots of conversations about like suffering as virtue and dehumanization and these like, splits between good and bad, in this way of storytelling that permeates our like American system of discourse, or like when we talk about things or make things. But like, I don't even know that there's anything that's good in here. Like, I tried to do my decoder ring where I was like, okay, what's good and what's bad? And in my notes, I have like, this is where the trouble starts. Because
Act 1, Scene 1.
The only good people in this movie really are like the long-suffering wife who like idolizes him but lets him treat her terribly, and the black best friend who he also treats terribly, and his disabled niece, who, spoiler alert, he's not super nice to, right? Yeah. So bad is like taking advantage of the tortured genius. I don't know. Or like the problem is like everything. The American system of doing things, fascism, Nazis, not letting a genius do his work. I'm not sure. The solution, I just have 3 question marks. I'm like, nothing matters. Heroin, like unclear on what the film even thinks about art. Like, I'm not even sure, right?
Yeah.
And I would say if this were a true story, right, I would have a little bit more empathy toward it, because I would be like, okay, but this is what happened, right?
Right.
And I would be like, oh, those buildings are cool because now I actually know from this Biennale segment what he was going for, right?
Right.
But now I'm like, is that all made up? Because he never said that that's what he was doing. So for me, it's like, why did you make this story up, right?
Right.
Another sort of content drain thing, like sexual assault, is used as a plot device here in a way that I find really icky. You also have the like metaphor of a disabled person who's been in a wheelchair, like literally standing up to make a point. Yeah, exactly. Just things where I'm like I am so convinced that this is going to win the Oscar, and it's going to say something about right where the Oscars are at a little bit.
Woo.
This is a beautiful movie. This is a love letter to cinema, but it's just not my thing.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, Dr. Shan. We will continue with AV Club next week. I hope you all enjoyed this. I certainly did. And make sure you like and subscribe, follow us, and beat us up in the comments here about our opinions on these movies. And by our opinions, I mean Shannon's opinions because she watched them, and mine is her opinion because we've been friends for long enough that I know that we agree. All right. We'll see you next time.